Chancellor of the Exchequer, Dr. Paul Williams.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Financial Secretary of the Treasury, Minister Mel Stride.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I shall take this question along with questions 2 and 12 together. Mr. Speaker, disguised remuneration is an aggressive and contrived form of tax avoidance involving a loan which there is never any intention of repaying, being routed via a low or no tax jurisdiction, then back to the United Kingdom in order to avoid income tax and national insurance. HMRC takes a measured, proportionate and sympathetic approach to the collection of this tax, which has always been due.
Dr. Paul Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent contacted me about this, and he said that he had no choice in how he was contracted to work on a BP Norway project. So why is he being pursued rather than BP Norway and the other companies like NRL, AML and ICS Salary Limited, who all work together to undermine workers' rights and minimise their tax liabilities? What action has the government taken against these agencies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I refute the fact that anybody is forced into taking a tax avoidance arrangement, and if something looks too good to be true, it generally means that it is just that. Of the settlements to date, of which there have been over £1 billion worth, some 85% have been from employers, not employees, and we are actively pursuing promoters in exactly the way in which the honourable gentleman would wish to see.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The loan charge APPG, I understand, has now been sent evidence of 3 suicides of people facing the loan charge. More than 100 people in Edinburgh West have been affected by the charge. Many of them have been to see me at constituencies, and they are worried about their financial future. They did not understand that this tax was going to be put in place retrospectively. And so, considering all this evidence, I'm very concerned about the well-being of those constituents who say they may be facing financial ruin. Surely the only responsible thing to do is to pause, announce a delay and an independent review, knowing that already people have lost their lives.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The loan charge is not retrospective. There has never been a time in the history of our country where the arrangements that I've described just a moment ago were ever compliant with our tax code. And of course the loans, for which there is no intention of ever repaying those loans, it's simply the loans are there to avoid national insurance and income tax, persist in the present time. There are generous time to pay arrangements available with HMRC, and I would urge anybody who is involved in this kind of avoidance to talk to HMRC and to come to sensible arrangements.
Ryan Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister not aware that the people affected by this are strivers and people just about managing? They're the people who are suffering as a consequence of this decision, along with groups of people like WASPy women. How many times is this government going to hit ordinary working people without ministers fulfilling their responsibilities and intervening in a set of circumstances like this and ensuring that common sense prevails?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the average earnings of those, if you include the loans, who have been involved in this egregious tax avoidance is twice the national average wage in our country. There is no need for people to get involved in these schemes. The sole purpose of these schemes is to avoid tax. Some members have raised amounts of some £700,000, £900,000 that have been pursued by HMRC in this context. That would equate to a couple of £1 million going through these schemes. And I remind the House, this is a scheme that takes loans from the UK out to an offshore trust in a low or no tax jurisdiction, routes it back into the UK as a loan that is never due to be repaid, simply for the purpose of avoiding tax. And we don't believe that that is right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Minister's right when he says this is not retrospective, how come we have examples like that faced by my own constituent who was actually pursued with an accelerated payment notice back in 2015 in relation to a loan charge scheme? He paid the amount that HMRC asked him for, and then suddenly out of the blue and sent to a wrong email, he has now been requested to probably pay more money. Doesn't that show that the HMRC has shifted the goalpost and that therefore this is actually retrospective?
Mr. Speaker, I entirely stand by my earlier remarks about these measures not being in the least retrospective. I cannot, of course, comment on an individual tax affairs that the Right Honourable Lady has just brought before the House, and I don't think it would be right of me to do so or proper of me to do so.
Julia Lopez.
Speaker, I've received increasingly distressed representation from constituents affected by this. One of their concerns is that in making any settlement with HMRC, they risk giving up their right to review in the event of any subsequent change in government policy. Could the Minister please advise my constituents what they might do, as they currently feel trapped between this prospect and the risk of further financial penalty by HMRC if they don't come to an agreement quickly?
Mr. Speaker, I and the government have made it very clear over a long period of time, and at least since 2016, when these measures were first brought in to effect, which is in fact before I arrived in my current position, that our policy is our policy, and we are not going to change that policy. And the recommendation is very clear that those who have been involved in this form of aggressive and contrived tax avoidance, the best thing to do is come and speak to HMRC and to come to a sensible and reasonable arrangement for repayment.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the Minister's sincere desire to tackle disguised remuneration and thank him for always being available to discuss my constituents' concerns. However, something has clearly gone very wrong with the operation of the loan charge, and now too, I fear, with the rollout of IR35 to the private sector. Could the Minister commit, please, to pause both the loan charge and the rollout of IR35 to the private sector until my constituents' concerns have been fully addressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, IR35 is often raised in the context of the loan charge, but it's a completely unrelated matter. IR35 is about making sure that those who are effectively employed by other businesses are treated as employees for tax purposes, and that is only right and proper. The loan charge is about putting right the situation of this aggressive tax avoidance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given that nurses and cleaners, the lower paid, can be adversely affected by this, and distinguish between those that are deliberately tax avoiding, will the Minister not agree to at least extend the payback period rather than people having to go through the rigmarole with the taxman?
Well, the honourable gentleman, I think, makes a very important point, which is that when it comes to paying the money that is due, then HMRC has a duty to be proportionate and make sure that appropriate arrangements are in place. There is no maximum limit for the time over which repayments can occur. There are often arrangements that come into place that are well in excess of 10 years, and HMRC will continue to approach these matters on that basis.
Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I also thank the Minister for engaging on this issue as he is doing. And whilst I certainly do agree that anybody who's tried to avoid tax in this way needs to be accountable, but is it right that HMRC can go back 20 years to reopen accounts which were accepted? If this tax was due then, why did HMRC not obtain that tax then? Why did they not charge it then? Why has it taken them 20 years to get to this point?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already dealt with the issue of retrospection, but as to why tax may not have been paid at the time that it was due, there are a multitude of reasons for that, not least the fact that many taxpayers simply do not volunteer the correct information or claim that their scheme works when clearly it doesn't. HMRC has over many, many years pursued these various schemes through the courts, including the Supreme Court, and on each occasion these schemes have been found not to work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasury have claimed that the off-payroll tax should not affect the genuinely self-employed, yet HMRC's CESS tool assessed 3,909 contractors across 5 key public sector bodies, and the results were that 94% of the contractors were deemed employees. This clearly demonstrates that the CESS tool is leading to the wrong decisions. So will the Minister now agree to cease use of the CESS tool and to put those plans to roll it out to the private sector on hold?
With the honourable gentleman, the statement that he's made doesn't suggest that the CESS tool is inappropriate. The CESS tool is there to determine an individual's employment status. In 85% of cases, it does give a determination. HMRC will stand by that determination, provided the right data was put into the CESS process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following a recent case, an individual convicted of benefit fraud was given 900 years to pay off the 88,000 they defrauded from the state. But those facing the loan charge have not committed any criminal offence or broken the law, yet are being hounded by HMRC for unaffordable sums. So can my right honourable friend please advise, why are HMRC persecuting innocent people to the point that it's affecting their mental and emotional well-being by allowing convicted fraudsters such leeway?
Well, Mr. Speaker, HMRC is not persecuting people, as the honourable member suggests. They are collecting the tax which is due. They are not pursuing people for criminal activities, as the honourable gentleman suggests. However, when it comes to criminality, I can announce to the House that very recently, on the 16th of May, HMRC announced that 6 promoters of these schemes have been arrested on suspicion of loan charge tax fraud.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker. From this side, we've repeatedly asked the government what they're doing to clamp down on the enablers of loan charging. We've repeatedly received feeble answers showing inertia and inaction. We've had more of that today. So more broadly, why is the government not doing more to crack down on lawyers, accountants and others aiding and abetting tax avoidance under the guise of legitimate tax planning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman probably composed his question before he heard my last answer. I've just made it clear that we have just even recently had 6 arrests relating to fraudulent activity, suspected fraudulent activity around the loan charge. We're also actively pursuing 100 promoters of tax avoidance schemes, including those relating to the loan charge, and we have brought in up to £1 million fines for those promoters engaged in just this activity.
Peter Dowd.
6. There are thousands of these wheezers going on out there under another example, under existing tax compliance and procurement rules and public contract regulations, Mr. Speaker. There is provision for public contracts to be denied to individuals and organisations who do not comply with tax law, possibly including these promoters of loan schemes. So can the Financial Secretary, amidst evidence of tax avoidance and enabling by organisations winning public contracts, why not one single individual or organisation has been banned from securing those public contracts?
Mr. Speaker, is not the difference between this side and that side of the House on tax avoidance quite simply this? This government is serious about it. It has brought in and protected £200 billion since 2010. The tax gap is at a near historic low. And if it was as high as it was under the last Labour government, we would be deprived of sufficient funds to employ every policeman and woman in England and Wales. This government is serious about avoidance and evasion, and it has a record to be proud of.